First of all, you talked about joint tenancy. So will you talk a little bit about, define that? What is joint tenancy and why, yeah, again, what made it turn out that way in such a negative way? Of, oh my gosh, I can't believe someone who was a thief all of a sudden gets hurt on your property and then sues you for millions of dollars. It seems so wrong on our core morally to have somebody do that kind of stuff. So how you protect yourself is really, really important.
Welcome to the Jennifer J. Hammond Podcast. Jennifer is a licensed realtor, educator, speaker, and best-selling author. Jennifer's goal is to help you find your yay in every day.
Some quick background on me. I'm an attorney and have been for well over 30 years. I started out in an international law firm with about 1,000 lawyers all over the world, and then went to an international oil company, which is now merged with British Petroleum. And then for a number of years represented the world's largest airline, and that was by far the funnest job. And I did all of that as a trial lawyer. I sued people and companies for a living. But one particular case turned everything around for me and caused me to quit being a trial lawyer and become an asset protection attorney. And it was this. Normally in a trial, it's one company suing another, and the loser just writes a check and life goes on. But in this particular case, it was individuals who were suing. And I was representing the company that had fired them wrongfully. They had the winning case. They had been terminated because of age. That's age discrimination, and you cannot do that. So they had a great case. They should have won, but because we were very good lawyers, we won the case. And as I mentioned, normally it's not a big deal. You know, somebody writes a check and life goes on. But here, these people had lost their jobs, they had lost their incomes, lost their pensions, and they were financially destroyed. And that was wrong. And I was part of that wrong. And at that point, I said, I cannot do this anymore. It's not right. And I took everything I learned about suing people and companies, and I now use it to protect people from lawyers like I used to be.
First of all, you talked about joint tenancy. So will you talk a little bit about, define that? What is joint tenancy and why, yeah, again, what made it turn out that way in such a negative way?
Well, joint tenancy is one of the most common forms of joint ownership, and it's very common among spouses and related people, siblings, etc. Joint tenancy basically means that you both have your name on a title of either real estate or a vehicle or some other title, and once again, it's a very, very common way of owning assets. But the problem is that when one joint tenant does something wrong, the other joint tenant could lose everything they own jointly with the wrongdoer, and possibly more. And so it's very important to consider, how do we own these potentially risky assets that could give rise to a lawsuit? How do we own those? Are they owned in a way that could involve you in a legal matter?
And I think the thing is we don't like to think about the bad things that something awful could happen. And I'm known for, yay! Oh, and I think I even forgot to say, hi, this is Jennifer Hammond. Yay! Because I got so busy with the whole, it's funny with going live on Facebook or YouTube or Clubhouse, you get the details sometimes get to be a little confusing. But I wanted to also say, when we never think about, like if you slip and fall in a grocery store, or if you get into a car accident, or what other awful things can happen. So I hate to continue with negative stories, but would you share one more? I know you've got a bunch of them, of when someone did it wrong.
Well, sure. I mean, premises liability is a big issue. Those are the slip and fall cases. And the general rule is that if you own a piece of property and you had a duty to maintain that property in a non-hazardous way, and someone is injured on that property, then you can be liable for anything. Here's an example. There were a couple of teenagers walking across a field, and they came upon an exposed live electrical wire, and they were badly burned as they touched it. Kids are going to be curious. They touched it. They were badly burned.
Kids love to touch everything.
Oh, yes, of course. And they ended up getting a $24 million judgment against the property owner for having that dangerous condition on his property. So, if we're a property owner,
repeat that. You said 24 million?
A $24 million judgment.
Ouch! That's a lot of money.
Yes, it is. And once again, the reason is because we have a duty, typically as property owners, to protect against any hazards. This is why people with backyard swimming pools have to have a high fence, have it fenced in, because it's an attractive nuisance which could attract children and others, and create a harm. So
talk about that. That's another legal term. I was pre-law, so I know enough to know. I know enough to be dangerous. So will you talk about that? What does it mean? An attractive nuisance.
Well, once again, an attractive nuisance is a condition on a property that would allow someone to potentially injure themselves. It requires the negligence standard, which is knew or should have known. In other words, we need to think through, okay, what could possibly go wrong here? Who could possibly be injured? And then protect against it as a property owner.
And I think that I love the word attractive, because one of the things that I've seen from reading some of the cases is that in some ways, you have to almost have a foresight to know that it would be attractive to, whatever group of people, maybe to children or to, I don't know, somebody walking through your land, or just it's attractive in some way that maybe you thought about or maybe you haven't thought about before. So again, okay, so one more story of negative. So what did somebody do wrong with asset protection that they should have done better, or they should have talked to an attorney, or they should have gotten some kind of, because I want to start defining asset protection and dig in a little bit deeper on what are the ways to do that. But one more negative story, Bob.
Well, sure. And this is once again another kind of example of what we've been talking about. There was a case of a burglar on a roof trying to break into a building. This guy fell through a skylight, and was injured in the fall, and from his hospital bed sued the property owner for millions of dollars worth of his injuries. And so once again, you would think, well, this guy's a bad guy. I mean, he was trying to rob the business. Well, none of that matters ultimately in the case. So once again, you have a duty to maintain the property in a non-hazardous way.
Well, and I think that that's such a good example too, because again, when we think, well, they were doing something wrong, they were breaking the law, and why couldn't they be rewarded? That's so frustrating. And that's part of the reason I wanted to kind of go through some of the negatives, in the fact that, asset protection, it's something that we all need to understand, and really understand it. I want to say in a new unit at a time, regularly, because the laws change. Would you agree?
Yes, they do. And, quite frankly, the laws have changed over a period of decades, so that in the past, in order to be sued, you actually had to do something really wrong, and wrong in the sense that we all understand. You punched somebody, you caused some accident. Now the laws have changed so that, frankly, you don't have to do anything wrong in the traditional sense in order to be sued. You could have signed a document the wrong way. You could, there's so many other ways. You could simply own an asset the wrong way, which entangles you in a lawsuit now. And so there are so many different examples. You can be liable for what your employees do wrong if you're an employer. You can be wrong for what a partner does wrong. You could be sued for what a partner does wrong. You could be sued for what your child does wrong if they're driving a car titled in your name. So there are so many different ways that you can be sued having done absolutely nothing wrong yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's the scary part, is thinking that you don't want to live in fear. You
No.
want to actually just step forward with very sensible ways to protect yourself. So
Well, right.
let's talk about that. Asset protection. What does that mean? How do you protect yourself?
Well, I like to think of it as, real estate, let's say, as a game, and if you're going to play a game, you suit up for the game. Think of football. You don't go out and, without protective gear and, get banged around and possibly injured. Instead, you put on the helmet and the protective gear. And the same thing is true if you're going to go play the real estate game. Don't be overly afraid. I mean, get into the game, but be protected as you get into the game. And that would be involving typically a limited liability company or corporation or a limited partnership of some kind. Oftentimes we'll use a trust of various kinds. And these are simply protective measures that you would use. And then you go forward and don't be afraid. Go out and do deals and get into real estate and enjoy the practice. Yeah.
Enjoy the Monopoly game and make it a game, but also it's funny that Monopoly doesn't have that aspect to the game. But first and foremost, you should have your asset protection in place. So you should consult an attorney in your area to make sure you're talking about it. But also, I know that you work in many states, right? Not just in Texas, right?
Well, sure. We help people in many situations, and the key is that people are involved in different types of real estate. They will often come to us with properties in different states, and they need liability protection in those particular states. So we of course assist them, help them, and refer them if we're not able to in a particular case. Yep.
That's wonderful. I think it's important that, again, that you are reaching out and that you can help people in different places or refer them, which is important too, because sometimes it is local if it's a different state or whatnot, but you can do a lot of setting up their basics for them. So before I shift into some other details, I wanted to share a little bit, if you'll share a little bit about your journey into law and I want to say from the dark side. Bob moved from the dark side over to the light.
Yes, well, I started many years ago as a trial lawyer and was in court, suing people, protect and defending people as well. And one particular case changed it all for me, because we were defending a company and the company really had done something wrong here. Now, we're talking always about civil law. I never did criminal law. So no one ever goes to jail in the kinds of cases that I was dealing with. But the company had fired some people who they deemed to be too old, and that's age discrimination, which is actionable. In other words, these defendants, or rather these plaintiffs, were suing with a very valid claim. They had been fired because of their age, and they should have won the case. They had a great case, but because we were better lawyers, we actually won the case. And that's another aspect that we ought to talk about. So often, it's not a matter of who's right, who's wrong, who has the law on their side. It's who has the better lawyer. And sad to say, that's the way our legal system works. But as the verdict was read, we had won the case. We left the courtroom, and the plaintiffs were there with their families. They were weeping and thinking, how are we ever going to survive? We're going to lose our homes. They were never going to get hired again at the same wages. They were financially devastated, and that was wrong. And it struck me as being so wrong that I decided that I just wasn't going to do that anymore. And so I completely switched sides and took everything I had learned about suing people, and I use it now to protect people from lawsuits and lawyers like I maybe used to be.
You've gone from the dark side over to the light.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the reasons I love for you to share that story, because it's so important to be able to to understand that having mission-based anything, any of your businesses have a deep purpose of helping people, I think those are the people that we're going to make the most success in this world. Is really, that's my viewpoint in life, is that we want to help people as much as we possibly can. And hence the reason I wanted to make sure that we share asset protection in all those ways. So we have a couple more minutes. So we have more people that have joined us in the Clubhouse room. So we will open up to questions around 8:30 today. So about half past the hour. But I wanted to, again, so Bob, I have more questions, of course. We could do this for hours and hours because I always have a gazillion questions. So for people who are also in real estate and they're looking at buying multifamilies or even going into a partnership with someone who is doing multifamily real estate investing, what are your suggestions for strategy there as far as owning an entity and then being able to, how do you share that partnership when you have multiple people involved?
Well, there are some very important structures that someone should consider. And one is that you ought to have what we would call a holding company. And a holding company is simply a company that owns another company or part of another company. And so to the extent that you're going to be owning a piece of an LLC or a limited partnership that is going to own the actual property. So have I confused anybody yet? So in other words, let's think of it this way.
We need a whole chart. We need a whiteboard.
Yes, we do. But we have an entity that owns the multifamily property. But then the question is, who are the owners of that entity that owns the property? And it could be you as an individual, Jennifer Hammond, but it could also be Jennifer Hammond LLC that owns your interest in that property, and that would be your holding company. And there are a number of advantages to owning a part of an equity interest in that way. Number of advantages, and so that is one thing that one should consider is how do you once again own your asset, and that is even an asset that needs to be protected as well. So that is one thing. If we're investing in smaller multifamily properties, you can do it as what's called a joint venture. Otherwise, if you're investing in a larger multifamily property, that would be a syndication. That requires a securities lawyer to make sure that you're complying with all state and federal securities laws. So it depends on, once again, the size of the property, the size of the investment, and whether that investment is being marketed to the public or is simply going to be a joint venture among friends who are all going to participate in that particular project.
And then I'm going to complicate it. So multifamily with multiple owners, say we have like a dozen owners, and then they're all in different states.
Well, once again, that could complicate things depending, once again, on the particular issues. But once again, it'll depend on, will they have any kind of an active role in that business, or will they be passive investors? That'll help to determine whether it's a security or a joint venture. And once again, those determinations are important to be made up front with an attorney, so you know exactly how to approach it.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I find that it gets more complicated as you cross state lines.
Oh, yeah.
However, with real estate investing, even for myself, I like to cross state lines because sometimes the deal that I'm looking for is definitely not in the jurisdiction in which I'm living. It's not where my domicile is. And so I want to make sure, if it's my home, I want to, my home state, I want to have whatever asset protection I can have for there. But again, crossing state lines, it's different in different states. And I think I would love for you to also talk a little bit to the fact that there's certain states that are, I want to say, preferred versus other states when you're incorporating with an LLC, a C Corp, whatever it is that you decide. Like, for instance, the difference between say California versus Texas.
Well, there are some very big differences. And in fact, this is one of the reasons why it's really important to talk to someone who is knowledgeable in this area, because there are, frankly, about 30 states in which setting up an LLC is really not going to give you very much protection at all. And the reason is the states all vary in terms of how much protection they want to provide as a matter of public policy and state law. And as a result, there are some states that have said, we're going to be the best in terms of asset protection, and others that say, we don't care about protecting landlords, we would rather protect the tenants. And so we need to know, are we in a landlord-friendly state, or are we in a state with strong state laws that are going to protect you in as many instances as possible, or are we in a state that is going to favor the other party, your tenants, as opposed to you, and not give you much protection at all?
And I think that that's really critical in, like in Washington, D.C., it's definitely let the landlord beware. I always go back to that caveat emptor, that Latin phrase of let the buyer beware. Mm-hmm. And in Washington, D.C., it's definitely let the landlord beware, because we have so many protections for the tenant, to the point where we also have a thing called TOPA, T-O-P-A, Tenants Opportunity to Purchase Act. And what that has done is it's really taken away and I know there's been a lot of lawsuits about this. It's taken away a right that a lot of property owners find is a basic right, and that's the basic right to sell the property to the person you want, because the tenant has the right to buy first opportunity. They can match an offer, they can buy it out from underneath another buyer. It's really complicated. Tenants and sellers or landlords in our area, and I'm in the Washington, D.C. area, so we're crossing state lines all the time: Virginia, D.C., Maryland. But I also
very common in your area. Yeah.
So it's very common to understand that each law is, I want to say each state is different in the way that they look at asset protection, especially for real estate, and how we can, again, protect our rental properties, or if you decide to go into a partnership, which again is very, very common, because a lot of times we're looking at private money. And so you raise the money from a private source, from an individual, from somebody other than a bank or a hard money. And so now we need to figure out, how do we protect each person's interest in that thing? And so what advice do you have for someone who is just thinking about doing a partnership, and maybe it's just going to be two people? One person's going to be the money, and the other person's going to really be the sweat equity, is going to manage the whole project and do it.
Yeah, it's very common to partner with people in real estate. In a very, very common situation that you just described, one's the sweat equity partner, one is the money partner. And the important thing to realize is that you don't want to do a handshake deal. That puts you into what's called a general partnership, in which you can end up going broke for what your partner has done wrong, because in a partnership, each partner has the ability to bind the partnership. And so what is a stronger, more safer way to do business is to form an entity in which the two of you are either shareholders of a corporation or owners of the LLC. And that precludes your being considered as a partnership, a general partnership, I should say, which dramatically limits your liability.
Very good. So, and again, that's always state specific. So find out what is important. And I know you also are very happy to help people. If anyone is interested in finding out more, they can contact you. I know you were telling me best email is info at assetdefenseteam.com. Well, that's beautiful. As I always end every room, I always want to end it with our yay. So I'm going to ask everyone who's in Clubhouse, John Lee, David, everyone, even Eddie, you're up on stage still. If you would come off your mics and let's say yay. And a big thank you, of course, to Bob. Thank you for being here. But Bob, also, I ask if you would lift your voice and say yay as we go off the air. And thank you, thank you, thank you.
Jennifer Hammond Show